Part 3. Practice. Chapter 11. Orientation to Practice. 11.1. Why we practice. Learning to live soulfully in the schoolroom. Before turning to specific practices, it is helpful to remember why any of this is being undertaken at all. From the perspective developed earlier in this book, incarnation is not an accident, a punishment, or a test to be passed or failed. The soul does not arrive on earth broken or incomplete. Rather, it sends a portion of its awareness into the conditions of time, limitation, and relationship so that experience can be lived from the inside. We have referred to earth metaphorically as a schoolroom, not a place of judgment or grading, but a setting designed to generate contrast, choice, and consequence. Through these, understanding becomes embodied rather than merely known. This framing matters because it immediately reshapes how we approach practice. We are not here to escape the world, transcend our humanity, or correct some fundamental flaw. We are here to participate fully, while gradually learning to do so soulfully, with less fear, less distortion, and less separation. Practice is not about leaving the schoolroom. It is about learning how to be present within it. 11.2. What practice is not. The subtle traps of self-improvement and performance. With that orientation in mind, it becomes essential to clarify what practice means in the context of this book, and, just as importantly, what it does not mean. Practice is not self-improvement. It is not a project aimed at fixing what is broken, correcting moral flaws, or transforming oneself into a more acceptable or admirable version of who one already is. Approached in that way, practice quickly becomes another mask, a subtler, more refined identity organized around being calm, aware, spiritual, or evolved. The ego is remarkably capable of adopting such roles, and when it does, practice quietly reinforces the very patterns it is meant to soften. Practice is better understood as relationship. It is a relationship between awareness and experience, between attention and reaction, between what arises automatically and what is seen clearly. Nothing new is added. Nothing essential is acquired. What changes is the quality of contact with what is already present. Much like an apprenticeship, practice is less about acquiring new information and more about learning to see what has been operating all along. This distinction matters because many readers will arrive at this section carrying an unspoken assumption that practice should produce measurable progress, emotional steadiness, or a noticeable reduction in inner conflict. When these outcomes do not appear quickly, or appear inconsistently, the mind may interpret this as failure. Effort increases. Self-criticism creeps in. Comparison with imagined others begins. At that point, practice is no longer dissolving identification, it is strengthening it. 11.3. Failure, gentleness, and the conditions for real change. For this reason, it is important to say plainly at the outset, failure is expected, not as a motivational slogan, but as a structural reality. The habits explored in Part 2, judgment, comparison, fear-based interpretation, reactive identity, have been forming and reinforcing themselves for decades. They will not dissolve through understanding alone, nor will they disappear because we now intend otherwise. They will continue to arise, often automatically, often convincingly, and sometimes with great emotional force. This is not evidence that practice is ineffective. It is evidence that it is touching the correct terrain. Practice does not prevent conditioned responses from arising. It changes what happens next. Over time, it creates moments, sometimes brief, sometimes sustained, where awareness is present alongside reaction rather than being absorbed into it. In those moments, authorship becomes possible. Not perfect authorship and not constant authorship, but enough to begin living differently within the very conditions that once seemed to run us. Because of this, gentleness is not optional, it is foundational. Any practice that relies on self-attack, harsh self-evaluation, or moral condemnation will eventually collapse under its own weight. Such approaches merely replace one form of unconsciousness with another. Gentleness, as it is used here, does not mean indulgence or avoidance. It means accuracy without cruelty. It means seeing clearly without turning perception into a weapon. This is especially important because the practices in Part 3 will bring attention directly to the ways we judge ourselves and others. Without gentleness, that attention becomes punitive. With gentleness, it becomes illuminating. The aim is not to become better, but to become more honest, and honesty, when paired with compassion, naturally loosens distortion. Another clarification is equally necessary. Practice is not performance. There is no audience. There are no benchmarks to meet, no internal scorecards to maintain, and no ideal state that must be achieved before one can be considered doing it correctly. Practice unfolds privately, unevenly, and often invisibly. Its effects are not always dramatic, and they are rarely linear. Periods of clarity may be followed by long stretches of forgetfulness. Old patterns may reassert themselves just when we believe we have moved beyond them. With this orientation in place, we can now turn to the first foundational lens of practice: how to stand in the overlap between unity and individuality without collapsing into judgment or separation.